Key point 1. The hanging. Describe the public execution of Clayton. Make it vivid and brutal, focusing on the reactions of the townsfolk. Emphasize the finality of death. The sun beat down on Dust Bowl Gulch, baking the wooden gallows until they almost shimmered. Every man, woman, and child from the town and the surrounding ranches had gathered. Today was the day Clayton was to be hanged. Clayton, hands bound, stood on the platform. His face was hidden by the shadow of the noose, but his eyes, they were empty. Sheriff Brody read the charges: robbery, cattle rustling, and the cold-blooded murder of Old Man Hemlock. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Hemlock had been well-liked. The sheriff finished, his voice heavy. "Clayton, do you have any last words?" Clayton didn't speak. He just stared straight ahead. The sheriff nodded to Jebediah, the hangman. Jebediah, a nervous man known more for his carpentry than his grim task, fumbled with the lever. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The trapdoor sprung open with a loud crack. The crowd gasped. Clayton dropped. The rope snapped taut. There was a sickening thud. A long, awful silence fell over Dust Bowl Gulch. People averted their eyes, some whispering prayers. Children clung to their mothers. After what felt like an eternity, Doc Harding stepped forward and checked for a pulse. He shook his head grimly. "He's gone," Doc Harding said, his voice barely audible. They left Clayton hanging there for an hour, a grim warning to anyone considering a life of crime. Then, they cut him down and buried him in the potter's field, just outside town. Everyone had seen him die. Everyone knew Clayton was gone, or so they thought. Key point 2. The impossible return. Introduce Clayton's reappearance at sundown. He's alive, but different. Highlight his cold demeanor and the unsettling list he carries. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple. The townsfolk of Dust Bowl Gulch were just beginning to relax, the grim spectacle of the morning fading into memory. Supper was cooking, children were playing, and the saloon doors were swinging open for the evening crowd. Then he appeared. Walking into town from the west, the same direction they had buried him, was Clayton. He moved slowly, deliberately, his boots kicking up dust with each step. He wore the same clothes he'd been hanged in, but they were cleaner now, almost pristine. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the fading light. It wasn't just that he was alive, it was the way he looked. The warmth that had once flickered in his eyes was gone, replaced by an unsettling coldness that seemed to chill the very air around him. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge anyone. He carried a folded piece of paper in his left hand. It looked like a list. Old Maggie saw him first, dropping her basket of laundry with a gasp. "Clayton? But we saw you die." He didn't respond, just kept walking. Whispers started, growing louder as he moved further into town. People stopped what they were doing, their faces etched with disbelief and fear. Sheriff Brody, who had been enjoying a quiet drink at the saloon, rushed outside, his hand instinctively going to his holster. "Clayton," Brody said, his voice tight. "That ain't possible." Clayton stopped in front of the sheriff, his cold eyes meeting Brody's. He unfolded the piece of paper, his gaze never wavering. "It is now," Clayton said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. He held up the list, just enough for Brody to see. Brody's face paled. He recognized some of the names. They were the names of the jury members who had convicted Clayton. Key point 3. Initial fear and denial. Show the town's reaction to Clayton's return. Some are terrified, some disbelieve what they see, and others try to rationalize it. The air crackled with tension. Sheriff Brody, still staring at the list, swallowed hard. "Clayton," he repeated, "this is some kind of sick joke. You're dead. We all saw it." Clayton didn't flinch. "Am I?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. He turned and continued his slow march down Main Street. Panic began to spread like wildfire. Some people screamed and ran inside their homes, bolting the doors and windows. Others stood frozen, their faces pale with terror. A few, the more pragmatic ones, tried to find a logical explanation. "It's his twin brother," someone shouted from the crowd. "He must have a twin we never knew about." The idea caught on for a moment, offering a sliver of hope, a way to make sense of the impossible. But the hope quickly died. Everyone knew Clayton. He had no family. Old man Withers, who claimed to have seen everything in his 80 years, shook his head. "That ain't no twin," he croaked. "That's Clayton, back from the grave. I seen things like this before, out on the prairie. Bad things." Sarah Jenkins, whose husband, Thomas, was on the jury and therefore likely on Clayton's list, fainted dead away. Her neighbors rushed to her aid, whispering frantically about curses and deals with the devil. Sheriff Brody, despite his own fear, tried to maintain order. "Everyone, calm down," he yelled, but his voice was drowned out by the rising tide of hysteria. "There's got to be an explanation for this. We just need to think." But thinking was hard when faced with the impossible. Clayton was back, and he had a list, and everyone in Dust Bowl Gulch knew, deep down, that something terrible was about to happen. The sun had set on more than just the day. It had set on their peace of mind. Key point 4. The first death. Someone on Clayton's list dies mysteriously. Make the death unsettling and seemingly impossible to explain. The next morning dawned bright and clear, but the sense of dread in Dust Bowl Gulch hadn't lifted. If anything, it had intensified. Sheriff Brody had spent the night trying to convince himself that Clayton was a hallucination, a collective nightmare brought on by the heat and the stress of the hanging. But deep down, he knew better. Then, the scream shattered the fragile morning calm. It came from the house of Martha Grimshaw, one of the jury members. People poured out of their homes, rushing toward the sound. Sheriff Brody was the first to arrive. The scene inside was horrifying. Martha Grimshaw was slumped in her rocking chair, her eyes wide with terror, her skin as cold as ice. But there were no signs of struggle, no wounds, no indication of how she had died. It was as if she had simply been frightened to death. Doc Harding arrived a few minutes later and examined the body. He shook his head, bewildered. I don't understand it," he stammered. "Her heart just stopped, but there's no reason for it. She was healthy as a horse." Sheriff Brody looked around the room, his gaze settling on a single detail, a small, withered flower lying on the floor near Martha's feet. It was a death bloom, a rare desert flower that only bloomed under the light of a full moon. They were never found in town. He picked it up carefully, a chill running down his spine. Someone had brought this flower into Martha's house. Someone or something had killed her, and the impossible had just become terrifyingly real. Clayton was making good on his unspoken threat. The list was more than just names. It was a death sentence. Key point 5. Investigation begins. Introduce a skeptical lawman or a curious townsfolk who starts investigating Clayton's return and the subsequent deaths. Sheriff Brody knew he couldn't rely on superstition alone. He was a lawman, and he needed answers that made sense, even if the situation defied logic. While the townsfolk whispered about curses and vengeful spirits, Brody began a proper investigation. He started by questioning everyone who had seen Clayton the previous evening, piecing together his movements. No one had gotten close enough to speak to him, and Clayton hadn't said a word to anyone except for his brief exchange with Brody. Then he focused on the death bloom. He showed it to Doc Harding, to the local botanist, even to old man Withers, who claimed to know everything. No one could explain how it had gotten into Martha Grimshaw's house. Meanwhile, a young woman named Eliza, the town schoolteacher, also started her own investigation. She was known for her sharp mind and her love of books, and she refused to believe in magic or ghosts. She thought there had to be a rational explanation for Clayton's return and Martha's death. Eliza visited the potter's field, examining Clayton's grave. It was undisturbed, the dirt still freshly turned. She spoke to the grave digger, a grizzled old man named Silas, who swore he had seen Clayton buried with his own 2 eyes. He was dead. "Miss Eliza," Silas insisted. "Dead as a doornail. I don't know what you saw last night, but it weren't Clayton." But Eliza wasn't convinced. She started digging into Clayton's past, searching for any clues that might explain his reappearance. She spent hours poring over old newspapers, court records, and land deeds, looking for a secret, a hidden motive, anything that could shed light on the mystery. She felt that the key to understanding what was happening in Dust Bowl Gulch lay buried in the past, and she was determined to find it. Key point 6. Unraveling the past. The investigation reveals secrets about Clayton's past, hinting at a possible motive for revenge or a deal with dark forces. Eliza's research led her to a hidden corner of the town library, a dusty collection of forgotten documents. There, she found it, a faded newspaper clipping detailing a land dispute from 20 years ago. Clayton's family, it turned out, had owned a valuable piece of land just outside Dust Bowl Gulch. The land had been seized by a group of powerful men, including some of the very same jury members who had convicted Clayton. The article hinted at foul play, suggesting that Clayton's family had been cheated out of their property. Further digging revealed that Clayton's parents had died under suspicious circumstances shortly after losing the land, a supposed accident that Eliza now suspected was anything but. But that wasn't all. She also uncovered rumors of a hidden cave on the Clayton family's land, a place said to be cursed by the local Native American tribe. Some whispered that the cave was a gateway to another world, a place where dark spirits dwelled. Could Clayton have made a deal with these spirits to return from the dead and exact his revenge? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was mounting. Meanwhile, Sheriff Brody's investigation took a different turn. He discovered that Jebediah, the hangman, had been secretly paid off by someone to ensure that Clayton's hanging was quick and clean. Who had paid him and why? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, revealing a web of secrets, lies, and betrayal that stretched back decades. Clayton's return wasn't just about revenge. It was about uncovering the darkness that had always lurked beneath the surface of Dust Bowl Gulch. And the more they learned, the more dangerous the truth became. Key point 7. Growing paranoia. Fear grips the town as more people on the list die. Accusations fly, and trust erodes between neighbors. With each passing day, the atmosphere in Dust Bowl Gulch grew more toxic. Another name was crossed off Clayton's list. This time, it was Thomas Jenkins, Sarah's husband. He was found drowned in his well, despite the fact that he couldn't swim. A death bloom lay on the well's edge. Fear turned into paranoia. People started accusing each other, suspecting their neighbors of being in league with Clayton. The jury members who were still alive barricaded themselves in their homes, hiring guards and sleeping with loaded guns. Sarah Jenkins, driven mad by grief and fear, publicly accused Sheriff Brody of being involved, claiming he knew more than he was letting on. The accusation, though unfounded, sowed seeds of doubt among the townsfolk. Trust was eroding, and the community was fracturing. Even Eliza, with her rational mind, began to feel the weight of the growing dread. She found herself jumping at shadows, questioning her own sanity. The whispers of curses and dark spirits were becoming harder to ignore. Sheriff Brody, desperate to restore order, called a town meeting. But instead of finding unity, he found chaos. Accusations flew, fists were thrown, and the meeting dissolved into a shouting match. "We need to do something," someone yelled. "We need to stop Clayton before he kills us all." But how could they stop something they didn't understand? How could they fight a ghost? The answer, it seemed, lay hidden in the secrets of the past, buried deep within the darkness that had taken root in Dust Bowl Gulch. And time was running out. Clayton was getting closer, and the list was getting shorter. Key point 8. Confrontation. The investigator confronts Clayton, seeking answers. Clayton remains enigmatic, offering cryptic clues. Sheriff Brody, his face etched with exhaustion and desperation, knew he had to confront Clayton. He couldn't stand by and watch his town tear itself apart. He found Clayton on the outskirts of town, standing near the old Clayton family land. "Clayton," Brody said, his voice hoarse. "What do you want? Why are you doing this?" Clayton turned, his cold eyes piercing Brody's. "Justice," he said, his voice a low growl. "They stole from my family. They killed my parents. They left me to rot. But why come back like this?" Brody pleaded. "Why not just leave? Start a new life?" Clayton chuckled, a chilling sound that sent shivers down Brody's spine. "A new life? There is no new life for me, Sheriff. Only this." He gestured towards the town, towards the land, towards the sky. "This is my purpose. This is my destiny." "What about the death blooms?" Brody asked, What about the way they're dying? Clayton's lips curled into a faint smile. The desert provides, he said cryptically. It gives what is needed. What does that mean? Brody demanded. Clayton shrugged. Some things are better left unknown, Sheriff. Some doors are better left unopened. He paused, his gaze hardening. Tell Eliza to stop digging. Tell her the truth is more dangerous than she can imagine. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Brody was left standing alone, his mind reeling. He had confronted Clayton, but he was no closer to understanding the truth. In fact, he was more confused than ever. And he knew, with a sinking feeling, that Clayton's warning to Eliza meant she was getting too close to something truly terrifying. Key point 9. The source of power. The investigator discovers the source of Clayton's unnatural return. Perhaps a cursed object, a pact with a demon, or a forgotten ritual. Ignoring Clayton's warning, Eliza continued her research. She focused on the rumors of the cursed cave on the old Clayton property. She found an old map hidden within the library's archives, a map that supposedly led to the cave's entrance. Armed with the map and a flickering lantern, Eliza ventured out to the Clayton land. The air grew colder as she approached the rumored location, the silence broken only by the rustling of the wind and the frantic beating of her heart. She found it, a narrow opening hidden behind a thicket of thorny bushes. The air emanating from the cave was heavy with a strange, earthy smell. Inside, the cave was dark and damp. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, symbols that Eliza recognized from her research as ancient Native American glyphs. Deeper inside, she found a small altar made of stone. On the altar lay a single object, a tarnished silver locket. As Eliza reached out to touch the locket, a voice echoed through the cave, a voice that sounded like Clayton's, but deeper, more sinister. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice boomed. Eliza recoiled in terror, dropping the lantern. The cave plunged into darkness. She fumbled for her matches, her hands shaking. When she finally lit a match, she saw it, a shadowy figure standing in the entrance of the cave. It looked like Clayton, but his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. "This locket," the figure said, its voice dripping with malice, "is what brought me back. It is bound to my soul, and now it will be bound to yours." Eliza knew then that Clayton hadn't just made a deal with dark spirits. He had become one, and she had just stumbled into the heart of his power. Key point 10. Final showdown. A final confrontation between Clayton and the investigator, with the fate of the remaining people on the list hanging in the balance. Eliza screamed, scrambling back from the shadowy figure. She knew she had to escape the cave, to warn Sheriff Brody, to tell someone about the locket. She stumbled out of the cave, Clayton's chilling laughter echoing behind her. She ran as fast as she could, the thorny bushes tearing at her clothes, the darkness pressing in on her. Back in town, Sheriff Brody, worried about Eliza, was organizing a search party. He knew something terrible was about to happen. Just then, Eliza burst into the saloon, breathless and terrified. "Clayton, the cave, the locket," she gasped, trying to explain. Brody understood immediately. He grabbed his gun and rallied the remaining townsfolk. They had to stop Clayton, even if it meant facing something they couldn't comprehend. They rode out to the Clayton property, the sky a bruised purple with the approaching dawn. They found Clayton standing outside the cave, the silver locket glowing faintly in his hand. "It's over, Clayton," Brody shouted, his voice trembling but firm. "You can't hurt anyone else." Clayton smiled, a truly terrifying sight. "It's just beginning, Sheriff, and soon you will all be mine." A fierce gunfight erupted, but bullets seemed to pass right through Clayton. He was no longer a man. He was something else, something more. Eliza knew the only way to stop him was to destroy the locket. She charged towards Clayton, dodging bullets and leaping over rocks. She reached him, grabbed the locket, and with all her strength, smashed it against a rock. A blinding light filled the air, followed by a deafening silence. When the light faded, Clayton was gone. The locket lay in pieces on the ground, its power extinguished. The remaining names on the list were safe. Dust Bowl Gulch was safe for now. Key point 11. Epilogue. The town reflects on what happened, forever changed by the events. Hint at the possibility of the curse or the evil lingering. Dust Bowl Gulch slowly began to heal, but the scars of Clayton's return ran deep. The remaining jury members, though alive, were forever haunted by what they had seen. The accusations and paranoia faded, but the trust between neighbors was never fully restored. Sheriff Brody, forever changed by the events, resigned from his post, unable to shake the feeling that he had failed to protect his town. He left Dust Bowl Gulch, seeking peace in a quieter place. Eliza, hailed as a hero, remained in Dust Bowl Gulch, but she was no longer the skeptical schoolteacher she once was. She had seen the darkness, touched the supernatural, and knew that there were things in this world that defied explanation. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the town, Eliza walked to the potter's field. She stood before Clayton's unmarked grave, a sense of unease washing over her. She noticed something lying on the freshly turned earth, a single death bloom. Eliza knelt down and picked it up, her heart pounding. Where had it come from? Was it a sign that Clayton was truly gone? Or was it a warning that the darkness still lingered, waiting for its chance to rise again? She looked out at the vast, unforgiving desert, the wind whispering secrets in her ear. She knew that Dust Bowl Gulch would never be the same, and she knew that some doors, once opened, could never truly be closed. The tale of Clayton's return would become a legend, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lay hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened. The end? Or just the beginning of another story?